Welcome to Vietnam War Exposed, where we uncover the hidden tactical details that often determined life and death in the jungle. Deep within the dense canopy, a simple choice of where a soldier sleeps could decide if he survives the night. For the American forces, survival meant digging deep into the earth, relying on traditions forged in previous global conflicts. In stark contrast, the Australians brought a different philosophy, suspending themselves above the ground to merge with the forest. This video analyzes how a small technical detail reflects two opposing military philosophies regarding defense, stealth, and adaptation. We will explore the strategic reasoning behind these choices and how they impacted casualty rates during major engagements like Coral. To understand this divergence, we must first look at the historical doctrines that shaped these two distinct fighting forces. The United States Army remained loyal to the traditional combat styles perfected during World War II and the Korean War. Their doctrine emphasized static defense, believing that being below ground level was the ultimate protection against heavy artillery fire. Standard operating procedure dictated that every time a unit stopped, the entrenching tools came out to fortify their position. Digging a foxhole was not just a physical task. It was a psychological anchor for the American infantrymen in Vietnam. The earth provided a tangible barrier between them and the enemy, a small fortress in an otherwise hostile environment. Technically, a foxhole offers excellent protection against direct fire and shrapnel, provided the soldier stays low and keeps his head down. However, the Australian Army arrived in Vietnam with a very different set of experiences drawn from the Malayan emergency. They had learned the hard way that jungle warfare required mobility, silence, and the ability to disappear into the foliage. Instead of shovels, their primary tool for rest was the hammock, suspended approximately 45 centimeters above the jungle floor. This simple piece of equipment represented a shift in priority from static protection to dynamic adaptation and environmental stealth. By sleeping off the ground, the Australians prioritized flexibility, allowing them to break camp and move at a moment's notice. The contrast was striking. One force reshaping the environment to fit their needs, the other adapting themselves to the environment. The benefits of the hammock became immediately apparent when the tropical weather of Vietnam unleashed its daily torrential downpours. For the Americans, a foxhole quickly turned into a muddy swimming pool, making rest impossible and destroying foot hygiene. Meanwhile, the Australian soldier remained suspended above the mud, dry and relatively comfortable under his rain-fly sheet. Constant immersion in water led to severe cases of trench foot and fungal infections among the American infantry units. Beyond the water, the ground was home to a myriad of jungle creatures, from venomous snakes to aggressive insects. Sleeping in a hole meant sharing your bed with whatever crawled into it, seeking warmth or shelter during the night. The hammock provided a natural barrier against these pests, significantly reducing non-combat casualties caused by bites and stings. It also allowed for air circulation, helping soldiers stay cooler in the oppressive heat and drying out wet clothing faster. But the most critical advantage of the hammock was not comfort or health. It was the tactical element of stealth. Digging a foxhole is an inherently noisy process that creates a distinct acoustic signature traveling far through the jungle. Viet Cong scouts were masters of their environment and could easily pinpoint American positions simply by listening for digging sounds. Furthermore, the fresh earth piled up around a foxhole created a visual scar on the landscape that was impossible to hide. These visual cues allowed enemy forward observers to map out the exact perimeter of an American base before attacking. In contrast, the Australian hammock system left zero physical footprint on the ground and created almost no noise to set up. An Australian patrol could spend the night in an area and vanish the next morning without leaving a single trace. This made it incredibly difficult for the enemy to track them or estimate their numbers, adding a layer of psychological warfare. The Americans were often sitting ducks in known locations, while the Australians remained ghosts, striking from unexpected directions. Because the enemy knew where the foxholes were, they could pre-calculate firing coordinates for their mortars and rockets. Trapped in their holes, American soldiers became fixed targets, unable to maneuver without exposing themselves to deadly fragmentation. This tactical difference was dramatically highlighted during the Battle of Coral and Balmoral in May of 1968. When the base came under heavy attack, the Australians were not trapped in flooded holes but were instantly mobile. They rolled out of their hammocks and took up positions behind trees and termite mounds, confusing the attacking enemy forces. The enemy directed fire at where they expected soldiers to be sleeping, only to find empty hammocks and return fire. This mobility allowed the Australians to launch effective counterattacks, disrupting the enemy's assault waves and regaining the initiative. Statistical analysis of the battle revealed significantly lower casualty rates for the Australian units compared to similar American engagements. The reliance on foxholes, while theoretically sound for conventional warfare, proved to be a liability in the fluid jungle war. The hammock represented a doctrine of adaptation, acknowledging that the jungle could not be conquered, only navigated. Vietnam was a war where the environment was a combatant itself, punishing those who tried to fight against its nature. By fighting against the mud and rain with shovels, the American strategy inadvertently exhausted its troops before the shooting started. By working with the environment, the Australians conserved energy and maintained a level of unpredictability that saved many lives. Veterans today still speak of the hammock not just as a bed, but as a lifesaver that kept them mobile. It remains a symbol of the Australian Army's practical and flexible approach to warfare during the Vietnam conflict era. The lessons learned in Vietnam influenced modern jungle warfare equipment, with lightweight hammocks becoming standard issue for many special forces. The foxhole was a temporary scar on the land, a remnant of a war strategy that struggled to adapt. Ultimately, the jungle reclaimed everything. But the tactical lessons of mobility versus fortification remain relevant in military history. From the mud of the foxhole to the sway of the hammock, these choices defined the soldier's daily reality. Thank you for watching Vietnam War Exposed. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please like and subscribe for more. We upload new tactical analyses every week. Leave a comment below on which topic we should cover next. See you in the next video. Let us look deeper into the daily routine. The foxhole was also a private space for connection with home. The Australians developed compact cooking methods that could be quickly extinguished and packed away if contact was made. Maintenance of the foxhole was a constant chore, requiring hours of labor that could have been used for rest. The dry environment of the hammock allowed for better weapon maintenance, reducing the risk of jams during critical moments. Weapons kept in foxholes were constantly exposed to mud and grit, leading to malfunctions that cost American lives. Guard duty from a foxhole limited visibility to ground level, often obscured by tall grass and dense undergrowth. Australians often utilized slightly elevated positions for sentries, providing a superior field of view through the jungle layers. It is undeniable that against heavy machine gun fire grazing the ground, the foxhole offered superior immediate physical protection. However, against airburst artillery or mortars detonating in the tree canopy, an open foxhole could become a trap. The hammock offered no ballistic protection, but the strategy was to not be where the enemy was aiming. Americans invested heavily in sandbags and fortifications, further anchoring them to specific locations and reducing their tactical flexibility. The Australian doctrine focused on the patrol as the primary unit of survival, not the fortified base camp. U.S. bases required massive logistical trains to support the construction and maintenance of these static defensive networks. Australians operated with a lighter logistical footprint, carrying what they needed and relying less on noisy helicopter resupplies. The psychological toll of living like a burrowing animal wore down the morale of conscripted American soldiers over time. The Australians maintained strict hygiene discipline, believing that looking like a soldier helped you fight like a professional. Exhaustion from digging and maintaining defenses often led to dangerous lapses in concentration during guard duty shifts. Quality of sleep was a force multiplier. A well-rested soldier in a hammock was sharper than an exhausted one in a hole. As dawn broke over the jungle, the two armies would wake up to very different realities and daily routines. The American soldier emerged stiff and dirty, often spending the first hour just cleaning himself and his gear. The Australian soldier hit the ground running, packing his kit in minutes and ready to vanish into the bush. Operating primarily in Phuc Tuy province, the Australians tailored their tactics specifically to that region's terrain and enemy. The U.S. strategy often involved clearing the jungle to create fields of fire for their static defensive positions. The Australians preferred to keep the jungle intact, using the foliage as a cloak of invisibility against the enemy. Ground-level movement and sleeping also exposed soldiers to the infamous booby traps and punji stakes of the Viet Cong. Static bases required constant sweeping for mines that might have been planted by infiltrators during the night. By never sleeping in the same spot twice, the Australians made it nearly impossible for the enemy to plant mines effectively. From the air, a U.S. firebase was a clear, defined target, a brown scar visible for miles around. An Australian area of operation looked no different from the rest of the jungle, offering no targets for enemy planners. U.S. commanders argued that holding ground and inviting attack allowed them to use their superior firepower to destroy the enemy. Australian commanders believed in hunting the enemy on their own terms, rather than waiting to be attacked in a fixed position. The foxhole was designed for the M60 machine gun, creating a stable platform for laying down walls of lead. The hammock mentality translated to combat. Precise, concealed shots from unexpected angles rather than overwhelming volume of fire. Treating wounded soldiers inside a cramped, muddy foxhole was a nightmare for medics trying to keep wounds clean. The Australian focus on mobility meant they were always prepared to evacuate casualties quickly rather than hunkering down. The foxhole did foster a deep brotherhood, a shared misery that bound men together in the face of death. The Australians bonded through professional competence and the shared discipline of silence that kept them all safe. Reliance on foxholes often meant calling in airstrikes dangerously close to their own lines to repel attackers. Australians preferred to engage the enemy at a distance with patrols, reducing the need for desperate, danger-close air support. The trifold shovel became a hated symbol of labor for the GI, a tool used more often than their rifle. The hammock was a prized possession, light to carry and offering the only luxury available in the bush: sleep. The dense root systems of the jungle often made digging deep foxholes an exhausting, hours-long battle against nature. Australians simply used the trees and roots as anchor points, wasting no energy fighting the landscape they lived in. Under the light of flares, the dark pits of foxholes could cast shadows that played tricks on the eyes. Australians were trained to freeze instantly when flares popped, relying on camouflage rather than cover to remain unseen. The defensive mindset led to a reliance on tripwires and claymores to protect the immediate area of the hole. Australians relied more on human senses and alertness, trusting their ears to detect the enemy before they hit a wire. American base culture often allowed for noise and relaxation, which was detrimental to their situational awareness in the field. The Australian silence was absolute. They operated on the assumption that the enemy was always listening and watching. Even the glow of the cigarette in a foxhole could be a beacon for a sniper, a risk often taken. Australians practiced strict light discipline, using ponchos to smother any light needed for map reading or checks. Stories of soldiers waking up to find a cobra or viper coiled in their foxhole were common and terrifying. While hammocks protected them while sleeping, Australians still rigorously shook out their boots to check for scorpions. Malaria was a constant threat, and lying in damp, mosquito-infested holes significantly increased the rate of infection. The hammock's integrated mosquito net was a primary defense against malaria, keeping the soldier healthy and combat effective. The American approach often involved brute force, using armor and machinery to conquer the terrain rather than adapt. The Australian infantrymen respected the terrain, moving through it like water rather than trying to break it. Disposal of waste in burn pits was another indicator of U.S. presence, signaling their location to everyone around. Australians carried their trash or buried it deep, ensuring that a campsite looked abandoned for months, not hours. Moments of relaxation for U.S. troops often came with a dangerous drop in guard, creating opportunities for ambush. Australians never fully relaxed. Even during hygiene breaks, sentries were posted and weapons were always within arm's reach. Diaries from the era reveal the intense anxiety soldiers felt as the sun went down and they descended underground. Conversely, many Australians expressed a feeling of safety in the jungle, trusting their stealth to keep them alive. The reliance on helicopters for evacuation was a luxury that also broadcasted the location of every casualty event. Australians were prepared to carry their wounded for miles through the jungle to reach a secure extraction point. Aggressive clearing tactics like flamethrowers were used to deny cover to the enemy near foxhole perimeters. Australians cut only what was necessary, preserving the natural screen that protected them from observation. While scout dogs were valuable, their presence in a static base could sometimes compromise noise discipline. Australian dog handlers trained their animals to operate in absolute silence, using hand signals for commands. The detritus of war, like empty ration cans, often littered the area around U.S. foxholes, marking the terrain. Australians consumed lightweight dehydrated rations and meticulously packed out every scrap of waste they produced. Soldiers had to improvise, using condoms to cover gun muzzles to prevent mud from the foxhole clogging the barrel. By hanging weapons from trees, Australians kept them clean and at eye level, ready for instant use. In the Mekong Delta, the high water table meant that digging down often just hit water immediately. The hammock was the only viable solution in swampy terrain, allowing troops to operate where others could not sleep. As the war dragged on, foxholes evolved into elaborate bunkers, further cementing the static nature of U.S. strategy. The Australians resisted the urge to build permanent structures in the field, staying true to their mobile doctrine. Cultural differences played a role. The American draftee often sought escapism, while the Australian professional focused on the job. The Australian soldier was typically a volunteer or highly trained regular, bringing a professional mindset to the hardships. The one-year rotation policy for U.S. troops created a short-timer mentality that prioritized survival over tactical excellence. Australians served for the duration of their unit's deployment, fostering unit cohesion and a focus on long-term mission success. The physical exertion of digging in tropical heat caused dehydration and heat exhaustion before combat even began. Australians conserved their energy for the fight, resting in the shade and staying hydrated. Comfort was a non-factor in U.S. doctrine. A sandbag served as a pillow, and the ground was the mattress. The hammock provided orthopedic support, allowing for deeper sleep and better physical recovery after long patrols. Chronic back pain and muscle stiffness were common complaints among soldiers sleeping on the uneven jungle floor. A soldier waking up without stiffness was a soldier who could react faster in a firefight. Immersion foot could take a soldier out of action just as effectively as a bullet, a preventable casualty. The hammock system allowed soldiers to air out their feet and dry their socks nightly, preventing rot. U.S. troops relied on strong chemical repellents, the smell of which could also give away their position. The physical barrier of the hammock net was odorless and effective, maintaining stealth while protecting the soldier. The psychological strain of being grounded made every snapping twig sound like an approaching enemy sapper. Australians were trained to identify jungle sounds, distinguishing between wildlife and human movement, reducing panic. Panic and poor visibility from foxholes sometimes led to tragic, friendly fire incidents during night attacks. Better situational awareness and communication helped the Australians minimize blue-on-blue incidents in the dark. Wire obstacles provided protection but also restricted the defender's ability to counterattack or maneuver. Australians often dispensed with wire, preferring to push out ambushes to engage the enemy before they reached camp. The waiting game played by static defenders ceded the initiative to the enemy, who chose when and where to strike. The Australian philosophy was active defense, patrolling aggressively to disrupt enemy preparations and supply lines. Searchlights and flares were used to strip away the night, turning the jungle into a lit stage. Australians embraced the darkness, training their eyes to see and their bodies to move without artificial light. When available, machinery replaced muscle, but the result was the same: a static scar on the earth. Bushcraft skills, like knot tying and tracking, were as essential to the Australian soldier as marksmanship. Boredom in the foxhole was a dangerous enemy, leading to complacency and a dulling of the survival instincts. Australians stayed engaged with their surroundings, reading signs like disturbed birds to detect enemy movement miles away. Reconnaissance by fire shooting or throwing grenades at suspected noises was a common but wasteful U.S. tactic. Australians preferred to crawl out and investigate, confirming the target before revealing their position with gunfire. Improvised shelters in foxholes were often ineffective, leaving soldiers soaked and shivering through the night. A properly pitched hoochie, or tarp, kept the Australian soldier and his gear completely dry and combat-ready. Mud was the enemy of the M16. A jammed rifle in a firefight often meant a death sentence. By keeping gear off the ground, Australians minimized the risk of environmental debris causing mechanical failures. Even a change of socks was futile if the boots were wet and the soldier had to stand in mud. Starting the day with dry feet was a small morale victory that paid dividends in endurance. The foxhole was where soldiers shared their humanity, clinging to memories of a world without mud and blood. Australian morale was sustained by a dry sense of humor and a professional pride in their bush skills. Helmet graffiti became a way for U.S. soldiers to express their frustration and identity within the machine. Australians focused on camouflage, constantly adding fresh foliage to their gear to break up their outline. Many U.S. soldiers documented their tour like a dark vacation, capturing the absurdity of their situation. Australians were generally more camera-shy on operations, focusing on the job rather than the souvenir. Mail call was the highlight of the week, a brief mental escape from the reality of the foxhole. For the Australian, letters were read in the quiet privacy of the hammock, a personal moment of reflection. The U.S. military even dug foxholes for their tanks, burying steel behemoths to protect them from fire. Australians used their armor as mobile shields and fire support bases, rarely digging them in for long. Sandbags became the furniture of the Vietnam War for the Americans, used for everything from walls to chairs. Australians often adopted the Asian squat, keeping their bodies off the wet ground while resting temporarily. Sleep deprivation was a chronic issue, leading to hallucinations and reduced combat effectiveness for the dug-in troops. Strict roster discipline ensured that every Australian soldier got enough hammock time to remain sharp. Smoke grenades were used liberally by U.S. forces to mark positions, visible to friend and foe alike. Australians preferred discreet signaling methods like mirrors or panels to communicate with aircraft without alerting the enemy. Holidays were celebrated in the dirt, trying to recreate a semblance of normalcy in an abnormal situation. Australian celebrations were understated, a quiet toast to mates and home before returning to the job. Faith was a pillar for many, with chaplains moving from foxhole to offer spiritual armor. For the Australians, the ritual before battle was a final, meticulous check of weapons and equipment. When the U.S. Army moved to the offense, it was often with overwhelming force and aggression. Australians preferred the flank, the ambush, and the element of surprise over the frontal assault. The M79 grenade launcher gave the U.S. squad portable artillery, further encouraging a firepower-based solution. The Australian SLR rifle was a weapon of precision, suited for their doctrine of aimed, effective fire. The ultimate expression of U.S. doctrine was the B-52 strike, obliterating entire grid squares of jungle. Australians used artillery like a surgeon's scalpel, removing specific threats rather than leveling the forest. The cost of static defense was often paid in blood, with high casualty events shocking the public back home. The Australian regiment system meant that every loss was felt deeply by men who had trained together for years. In the end, many hard-won hills and bases were simply abandoned, the foxholes left to fill with rain. The Australian withdrawal was orderly and disciplined, reflecting their professional conduct throughout the conflict. Today, only slight depressions in the earth remain where thousands of American soldiers once dug for their lives. The sites of Australian camps have largely vanished, nature reclaiming the space as if they were never there. Veterans still joke that they moved more earth in Vietnam than the construction corps did back home. For the Aussie digger, the hammock is remembered with affection, a faithful companion in a hostile land. It was a clash of mindset, the fortress versus the flow, resistance versus adaptation, brute force versus finesse. Despite their differences, soldiers from both nations fought with courage and respected each other's distinct capabilities. As the sun set on the Vietnam War, the lessons learned from the jungle began to reshape military thinking. Modern armies now teach a hybrid approach, valuing both the protection of earth and the mobility of light gear. The jungle remains a neutral teacher, ready to test the next generation of soldiers who dare to enter. We remember the sweat and toil of those who dug in, seeking safety in the soil of a foreign land. And we remember those who learned to live with the jungle, finding a way to survive on its terms. The statistics stand as a testament to the value of tactical adaptability over rigid adherence to tradition. In war, as in nature, it is not always the strongest who survive, but those most responsive to change. We honor the memory of all those who served and sacrificed, regardless of the tactics they were ordered to follow. Their stories are etched in the history books and in the land itself, waiting to be rediscovered. The jungle keeps its secrets, but through analysis we can learn to read the stories written in the leaves. This has been a production of Vietnam War Exposed. We hope this analysis has provided a new perspective. Our research relies on declassified military reports, veteran testimonies, and historical analysis from both Australian and American archives. Please like this video to help the algorithm share history, and share it with a friend who loves military tactics. Would you choose the protection of the foxhole or the mobility of the hammock? Let us know in the comments. Check out our other videos comparing weapons and tactics of the Vietnam War on the screen right now. A special thank you to our loyal subscribers who make these detailed historical documentaries possible with your support. History is in the details. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and never stop learning from the past. Thank you for watching Vietnam War Exposed. We will see you on the next patrol. Dismissed.